My new stepmother accused me of being nice just to take my father's properties, but she turned pale when I handed her the news about who actually owns them. My new stepmother accused me of being nice just to take my father's properties, but she turned pale when I handed her the news about who actually owns them. Hi. So I'm 16 years old and have been living with my dad and his new family for the past 2 months. I've had a lot of problems with his new wife, Nicole. My dad started dating Nicole about 3 years ago, and to sum it up, she has always had an issue with me for no real reason. 3 years ago, I was 13, and she was a grown woman. However, she acted as if I was the plague of her existence all the time. Whenever my dad was around, she acted like I was her best friend, but as soon as he was out of sight, she became a completely different person. She has 2 kids of her own. Her son is 18 and her daughter is 15. Neither of them gets along with me either. It's like the whole family hates me for no reason. I guess they might be jealous of me because my dad is actually related to me, and they see me as a threat or something, which is funny because I should probably say the same about them, given that ever since my dad met Nicole, he refuses to even consider that maybe she isn't the person he thinks she is. According to my dad, she is the perfect woman, and according to me, she's like the evil witch disguised as a human. I've tried to tell my dad multiple times what kind of person Nicole really is, but he thinks it's all in my head and that I'm making it up because I believe he should still be with my mom. I'll admit, I was against the idea of them separating for a long time. For the record, my mom and dad were married until she passed away. I think the term is legal separation or something like that, but that's how my parents lived. Basically, they were legally married but lived separate lives. We all lived in the same house as a family and my parents made this decision so I could still experience a normal childhood. I don't know what they were thinking because I wouldn't call my childhood normal. Looking back, my parents realized they had fallen out of love when I was around 7 years old. I guess they considered getting a divorce, but the financial and emotional repercussions were something they didn't want to deal with. So they opted for legal separation instead. Luckily, we lived in a pretty spacious house, so all they had to do was stay apart in different parts of the house. They mostly minded their own business, but told me they were still my parents, just not husband and wife in the traditional sense, and they would live as roommates instead. I had no expectations for them to act like other parents. When I was a kid, none of it made sense to me, and I really wanted them to reconcile and act like my friends' parents did. I was happiest when we had dinner together as a family, and I got really upset whenever either of them brought dates home. I tried to ruin it for them. I just wanted to bring my parents back together for a long time. But when Nicole first came to our house, she was the first person who didn't seem affected by my bad behavior. Of course, I was 13 at the time, so it's not like I was throwing tantrums, but I was just very cold and rude to her. However, she didn't seem to care. Even after the next few times she came over, I was still the same way, but she just kept the same energy with me. Around 13, I finally started to realize that maybe my parents were actually happy with the way things were and that I didn't need to change anything about it. So after meeting Nicole a few times, I decided to stop getting angry whenever either of them had a date and tried to accept their arrangement. I think both my parents were really relieved when I stopped acting out and accepted the fact that they were no longer in love, but I don't think Nicole ever forgot the fact that I used to push my parents to get back together. And even though I stopped acting out, she held that against me. She and her family saw me as a potential threat. Her own husband had passed away years ago, and she and her kids really seemed to like my dad. After dating her for about a year, my dad sat me and my mom down. He told us that he was thinking about moving out and renting an apartment with Nicole and her kids so he could get to know them better because he was serious about her and wanted to marry her eventually. I didn't know how I felt about it, but my mom wasn't on board with the idea at all and made that very clear. She reminded him that they had made an agreement in the past to live together despite their issues until I was 18 so that I wouldn't miss out on anything. She respected Nicole and the fact that he was in love with her, but a promise was a promise, and she expected him to keep his word. I remember my parents thinking it over for a couple of weeks, but in the end, my mom got her way, and my dad had to give in. After that, I guess Nicole started to resent my mom and me because we were interfering with the way she wanted her family to be. Anyway, since last year, my mom had been having a lot of heart problems. I don't know the details, but she was in and out of the hospital for a couple of weeks. Then for the last few months, things were fine. But unfortunately, her heart failed again, and we lost her to a heart attack just over 3 months ago. My dad, my mom, and I were still living together at the time, and when we found her in the morning, she was already gone. We were all really devastated by it, and I think I took it the hardest. For about a month, it was just me and my dad, and he tried to be there for me as best as he could. But then, suddenly, a month after my mom had passed away, one day, he brought Nicole and her kids home and said they would be living with us now. He also dropped another bomb that day saying that they were getting married in a couple of weeks. It would be a small ceremony, just family and a few friends. He told me that the reason he was rushing everything was that he had already waited long enough. But now that his marriage with my mom had dissolved due to her passing, he felt he owed it to Nicole to fulfill his promises. He felt that I was old enough to handle it now. Plus, my dad believed that living together would cheer me up since he thought having my new family around would help me cope with my grief. I thought about telling him that having them around definitely wouldn't help at all and would probably make me feel worse, but I could see that he was really looking forward to it. I also knew that he had genuinely been waiting to marry Nicole and live with her, so I didn't say anything and just tried to be part of the happy family. I thought it was a bit insensitive of him to get married just a month after my mom had passed away. Regardless of the kind of relationship they had in the past, I knew they weren't romantically involved. Even so, I believed he should have at least waited a bit before bringing Nicole home. Anyway, I put on a happy face at the wedding and tried to be there for my father. After Nicole and her kids moved in, the only real change for me was that I went to the living room much less than before because I didn't want to see her around. I had only kept quiet for my dad's sake, but I didn't want anything to do with her, and I think the feeling was mutual. Her kids ignored me, and so did she. We just pretended to be close to each other when my dad got home from work and we sat down for dinner together, but that was it. Then, about a week ago, my mom's lawyer informed us about her will. Apparently, she had created her will recently when her heart started failing again. She had essentially left me everything she owned, and everyone else in her life received equal shares of the money she had left after I received the majority. Surprisingly, I had always considered my mother a very normal woman, but it turns out she owned a large number of properties. Her lawyer explained that she had inherited them from her late uncle who passed away a few years ago. But instead of telling us about this, she kept it a secret and left everything to me. Both my father and I were very surprised by this new information, but I was happy that my mom had left me so much. It wasn't the properties that excited me, but the prospect of having something entirely for myself in the future. Of course, I inherited a lot of money too, along with everything else she owned. The list of properties my uncle had left her was quite extensive, and I would decide what to do with all of it when I turned 18. Until then, my father would act as the estate's guardian. I guess my dad was really surprised that he had only been assigned as the estate's guardian by my mom, and that he hadn't known about any of these properties either. I suppose it didn't really matter since my mom had already separated her finances when they opted for a legal separation. But emotionally, I think he was quite unsettled. I didn't know what to say to him about all this, so I said nothing. But there was a very distinct and obvious shift in the way people acted toward me after that day. My step-siblings continued to ignore me, but now my dad joined that club too. He started acting very cold toward me after my mom's lawyer revealed the contents of her will, and it really upset me. I was most worried about Nicole's behavior toward me. She already hated me and never bothered to hide it in the first place, but she never acted out when my dad was around. Now, though, it barely mattered. She was openly nasty to me and acted like I was some kind of vermin or something. Strange comments, glares, basically, the whole package. It wasn't anything I wasn't already used to from her, but the fact that my dad didn't seem to notice or even care about it really bothered me. Then yesterday, I finally had a confrontation with Nicole. My dad wasn't home at the time, he was working late at night, and my step-siblings were out with their friends. I didn't want to be alone in the house with Nicole, so I made plans with a couple of friends and was about to leave when Nicole started yelling at me about how she wasn't the housemaid and wasn't going to wash my dishes. I tried to stay calm and told her I would wash them when I got back home, but she said those were my chores and that I had to do them. There's a rule in our house that everyone washes their own dishes, and I really was going to do it as soon as I got back home. But she started yelling at me so loudly that I lost my temper too, and soon it turned into a shouting match. She started cursing at me, and I cursed back at her. Then she finally said that she knew very well why I was still tolerating my father's relationship with her. Even after he married her just a month after my mother's death, I was stunned. I didn't know what she was going to say. Then, she went on to claim that apparently, my dad had finally realized that I was only pretending to be a happy family with them and playing the role because I wanted all the property my mom had left to my dad. According to them, they believed that I was being nice to my dad despite my true feelings toward him and his relationship with Nicole because I wanted him to leave all that property to me and nothing to Nicole and her kids. I realized that my dad had probably lied to her and told her that my mom had left all that property to him and not to me. I don't know exactly why my dad had lied to her about this, probably because he didn't want her to think that my mom had left him nothing aside from a little money. I'm still trying to understand the details of what's going on, but as soon as she accused me of this, I actually laughed in her face and told her the truth. She literally turned pale. At first, she refused to believe me, but when I stopped laughing, she could see that I was serious. After that, she didn't say another word, and I left the house. I decided not to go back because everything was too tense, so I spent the night at a friend's house. Just as I expected around midnight, my dad called me. he started yelling at me and said I had no right to tell Nicole the truth about the will. For some reason, he was furious with me. That really pissed me off. And I told him he had no reason to lie to her about these things, because he knew for a fact that she had left him nothing but a little money. All that property he had been claiming as his actually belonged to me. Besides, he had allowed Nicole to treat me horribly all this time just because he was jealous that my mom had left so much to me and nothing to him. My dad told me that he had been planning to talk to me later because for the past few years, his business hadn't been doing very well, and my mom knew that. Yet, despite that, she had never offered to help him. He said my mom had been selfish and had hidden the fact that she inherited so much from her uncle just because she wanted to be petty since she didn't like Nicole, and he wanted to be with a woman she didn't approve of. Obviously, my mom didn't like Nicole, especially after knowing how that woman treated me. So I don't think it was her fault. More importantly, my parents weren't even really married in the true sense of the word, so she didn't owe him anything to help him. She never asked him for money, no matter the situation. She wasn't required to offer him help, at least that's what I believed. And now, even her decision to leave everything to me seemed fair because my dad seemed to care more about Nicole and her family than about me, his own daughter. So who's to say he wouldn't have acted the same way and cared more about Nicole and her kids than about me? Selling all that property to contribute to their lifestyle instead of helping me. I thought it was a very valid concern my mother had, and she definitely had the foresight to think ahead. I don't think she did anything wrong, and I defended her decision when my father said she had been selfish and lied to him. He told me the only reason he had lied to Nicole and told her he had inherited all that property was because he intended to talk to me later and get me to at least share the profits I would make from the property with him in the future. Being his daughter, he never thought I would refuse the idea, but now he wasn't so sure anymore. When I asked him why he had allowed Nicole to treat me badly right in front of him in the past few days after he learned about the will, he said he had been too busy to even notice. He said Nicole had made up a theory about why I had been so quiet about everything that had happened since my mom passed away. That I was only trying to make him leave everything to me by acting kind. But he was too worried about the future to care about that, and he apologized. But that wasn't enough for me. I told him that if he had talked to me sooner and truly told me how he felt, I might have even considered the idea of sharing the inheritance with him in the future. But now, I think my mother did the right thing by excluding him and leaving everything to me because his priorities were clearly elsewhere. I didn't believe what he said, and I definitely didn't believe that he hadn't noticed that Nicole had been treating me badly and that I had been telling him the truth for years, that she was a horrible person who hated me. I told him that I thought the reason he hadn't told Nicole anything, even after realizing that she had been treating me terribly and allowing her to continue with that false theory she had made up, was probably because he was too afraid of losing her by telling her the truth. The only reason he hadn't kicked me out of the house himself was that deep down, he still had some parental feelings toward me, but mostly because it wouldn't be socially acceptable. And now, after the will, he needed to keep me close for the money. He thought it was outrageous that I had suggested something like that and told me to come home immediately, but I said I wasn't going back home anymore. In fact, I had decided that I was going to move out of the house as soon as I could. I didn't know where I would live, but anywhere would be better than living with my dad now. Then I hung up and blocked him. This morning, I woke up to a message from him, saying that he was very sorry for making me feel like he had failed me, but that he really loved me and didn't want to lose me. He asked me to come home as soon as possible so we could talk things out as a family. He said we had both said a lot of horrible things in anger the night before, but he knew we didn't mean any of them. But I'm not so sure that I didn't mean them, and I feel like a horrible person for even suggesting it. I think my dad is probably asking me to come back because he needs the money. So, what should I do if I refuse to talk to my dad? Update 1. There are a couple of things I feel I need to clarify before saying anything else. A lot of people have asked why I didn't move in with some other relatives if I didn't agree with Nicole moving in with us. I thought the answer was obvious. I just wanted to be there for my dad. After losing my mom, I didn't want to lose him too. Despite the whole Nicole situation, my dad and I never had a bad relationship. He was a good father. He was just blind when it came to Nicole. Now, things are going really bad. Also, all my relatives live really far away, and my life is here. My grandparents live out of state, so that's out of the question. Even if I wanted to, it would be really hard for me to move. Also, some of you wanted to know more about the living arrangement my parents had. We lived together as a family, but they weren't together as a couple. I guess that was really weird for most people, which is why none of their relationships lasted long, until, of course, Nicole came along. Like most of you, a lot of the people my parents dated after breaking up didn't really understand the arrangement. Essentially, my parents kept living together with their ex-partner and the daughter they had together. My mom stopped dating people after a while, and my dad had Nicole. She didn't seem to have any problems with the arrangement. And whenever Nicole came over, my mom would just lock herself in her room, and my dad would be in his. Their rooms were on opposite corners of the house, so it wasn't an issue. For those asking whether my mom had lingering feelings for my dad even after they broke up, I couldn't say. If she did, she hid it really well because in my eyes, they were just friends after I turned 13 and accepted that they would never get back together. Maybe she still had feelings for him, or maybe she didn't. I really don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. I've spoken to my mom's lawyer and told him about the fallout with my dad. I also talked to my grandparents, both my mom's parents and my dad's parents, and they all thought my dad was really wrong for what he did and how he treated me. They asked if I still wanted to stay with him, and the answer was a firm no. So they're all flying here to deal with the situation, and until then I'm staying with a friend. My dad has shown up here every day for the past week, but I've refused to see him. The truth is, I just don't know what his intentions are now, and I'm too confused about everything. He keeps contacting me on social media through multiple accounts, but I know for sure that he's still with Nicole and that they're living together in our house. Until she's gone, I refuse to trust anything he says. People can call me spoiled or whatever. I just don't care anymore. I have to take care of myself. So, I'm staying here until my grandparents arrive. Then we can all figure out what to do about this situation. All of them live out of state, and moving away from here isn't an option for me right now because I still have to go to school. I really don't want to move in with anyone else. I'll probably suggest living on my own, but I'm not sure if they'll be willing to allow that. I just don't know what's going to happen. I'm just crossing my fingers. Update 2. My grandparents arrived yesterday and took me to the hotel where they're staying to decide what to do. My dad was there too, of course, since he still has custody of me. When I suggested the idea of living on my own in an apartment, it was instantly rejected because I'm too young. My dad insisted on taking me back home with him, but I made it very clear that as long as Nicole was there, I wasn't interested in fixing things. The only way he could prove to me that he had no hidden motives and truly wanted to fix things with me was by kicking Nicole and her kids out. If he couldn't do that, we had nothing to talk about. He tried to argue with me several times, but I simply wasn't interested. My grandparents had to shut him down. They suggested taking me with them, but I wasn't ready to move, and my dad wasn't willing to give up custody of me, so we didn't know what to do. After a while, my grandparents asked me if I would be willing to work things out with my dad, and I repeated what I had been telling them. I would be willing to go back home with him as long as Nicole wasn't there. Then, they turned to my dad and asked if that was an acceptable solution for him, and after thinking for a couple of minutes he said he would make it work. I admit I'm quite surprised that he agreed to this, but I'm still not sure what will happen in the future. Right now, I'm staying at the hotel with my grandparents, and my dad has gone back home to talk to Nicole. I have no idea what to expect, and I really hope everything turns out well and that my dad doesn't start resenting me more than he already does. I'm genuinely confused about what to do and how to feel about all of this. He told us to give him a couple of days to talk things through with Nicole. He doesn't know what's going to happen either. The only thing I can do now is hope for the best. I really don't want to lose my family. Update 3. It's been a week since my last update, and I moved back home yesterday. In short, my dad and Nicole are getting divorced. When he went home that day, he tried to explain to Nicole that I wasn't ready to come back while she was still there. This made sense because she had treated me horribly in the past, and I didn't want to go through that again. He asked her to leave for a couple of weeks so we could work things out, but they were already having a lot of problems. After I revealed the truth about the property, Nicole got really angry. She felt deceived and thought that he wasn't someone she could trust for the future. So when he suggested that she leave for a couple of weeks, she completely lost it and decided to file for divorce. Her demands are pretty harsh, but luckily, they haven't been married for long, only a few months, and they had kept their finances mostly separate, so she isn't really entitled to much. My dad apologized to me for everything. He told me that his reaction after learning about my mom's will had been completely irrational and that he had been a terrible person for allowing Nicole to treat me that way. He said he was going to try to be a better father, and I'm going to hold him accountable for that. If he doesn't follow through, I will leave for good and file for emancipation. A lot of people might not agree with my decision to give my dad a second chance, but I believe I'm doing the right thing. Even if I'm not, it's my mistake to make because it's my life. I don't want to regret anything in the future, so I'm going to do what I think is right. Besides, he seems genuinely remorseful now. Now that he's seen Nicole's true character, I don't think he'll ever go back to her. In fact, he doesn't even seem to care about the divorce at this point. The only thing he's worried about is whether I'm okay or not. For now, I'm not sure if he's doing this because of the property, but we'll find out. Right now, I'm hopeful. Update 4. I'm back after a long time, 3 years to be precise. A lot of you wanted an update on how things were going with my dad, so here it is. He wasn't doing it for the property. He genuinely showed remorse for his behavior. Although his business went through a rough patch, he managed to get it back on track, and he is currently paying for my college education. I told him I didn't need it, but he insisted that after everything that happened, it was the least he could do for me. He hasn't spoken to Nicole since the divorce, nor has he mentioned anything about her. He didn't need to. He moved on from the divorce in his own way, and she only received a minimal settlement. Since then, we've been working hard to improve our relationship, and it has gone really well. We are now in a great place in our father-daughter relationship. Every time I come home, we try to do something fun together. I'm really proud of how far we've come. This could have gone wrong so easily, but I'm glad my dad chose to improve when he was given a second chance. I have no regrets. As for the properties, the person managing the rentals is still doing their job, and all the money from them is deposited into an account. The idea is that I'll be able to use that money to settle down once I finish college, since I don't have much time left, and it will probably be enough to buy a house. The rental properties bring in quite a bit of money, which is good since I could potentially live the rest of my life without working. But I also really like my career, so I'm going to work while continuing to rent out those houses for extra income. If you're wondering why I don't move into one of them, it's because they're not in the city where I grew up, nor in the city where my university is now. That's why I'll buy a place when I return to my hometown, since I really like it and want to live there when I graduate.